Welcome to the Dimension Tents training tutorial. Today we are going to be setting up a 10x10 3-ply tent. This is obviously the various gear we're going to be using for setting up the tent today. So as you can see, we've got our poles, our pegs, tent, our ropes, carabiners, pole caps, peg covers and hammer. In the background there you can see we've got our 10x10 ground sheet that obviously helps protect the tent and keep it clean. So today we're going to be setting up in two different setup styles. Firstly being open canopy or flat canopy, where we're going to be setting up the tent basically with all sides open. That obviously gives you the maximum amount of usable space underneath a stretch tent. And then secondly, we'll be doing a demonstration on setting up the tent with one side closed. What we're going to start with doing today is we're going to take our 10x10 meter stretch tent. We're going to open it up on our clean ground sheet that we have here to protect the tent. Once the tent is orientated and we're happy with the way it's facing, we will then start with taking our steel rebar pegs and we're going to position them around the perimeter of the tent in the correct positions. Basically what we're doing here is we take a 2.5 meter pole and we put it from the corner ring at a 45-degree angle and we measure the position of where our pegs will go. So there you can see you've got a 2.5 meter gap and we decided that is going to be the position for our peg for this style of setup. Following putting your 4 corner pegs in, we're going to then jump onto positioning your pegs for your 4 perimeter poles. Your perimeter poles are generally at 3 meters tall, so that then we basically are going to position the peg 3 meters out from the tent. So this is basically my 5 meter mark. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab a 3 meter perimeter pole. We'll place it on the center of the tent and we'll get a 3 meter marking distance where to put our peg. This process we will follow on all 4 sides of the tent. So our next step here is we're going to make our attachment points onto our corner pegs and we're going to put our guide rope from the corner ring and we're going to put a little bit of tension onto our 4 corner pegs around the tent. In order to do this, you're going to need your long 14 meter guide rope, a short rope of about 1.2 meters and 2 carabiners. We like to use double carabiners as it gives you a little bit more structural integrity. What we do is I normally double the rope up to give you a little bit of strength. We wrap it around and we loop it through itself to make a solid attachment point onto your rebar peg. We can then take our guide rope and we're going to attach it directly onto the corner ring on the tent and then attach it onto the corner carabiners that we've placed on our pegs. Generally, my guide rope, I tie a loop on one end. It makes for easy attachment. Basically, you put the rope through, you loop it through itself, and then you pull the excess through. Once you have your rope securely fixed onto your corner ring, you will then take it out to your corner peg, clipping it through both of the carabiners. And then what I generally like to do is double the rope up. So we'll take it back up to your corner ring and then tension it down back towards your corner peg. What we will do here next is we'll load a small amount of tension onto the rope. Not too much. So here what I'll do is I'll just do a simple half hitch and lock it off temporarily. We will then follow the same process on the other 3 corners of the tent. The next step is we're going to raise the 4 corners of the tent. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to insert our pole cap a little bit into the fabric of the tent. So set back about 70 centimeters from the corner. So in order to do this, we basically have our 2.5 meter pole with a clean rubber 50mm pole cap on the top. So what I'm going to do here, I will hold the rope and allow the guys a little bit of slack in order to push the pole up from underneath. Yep. Alrighty, that pole, we're happy with its position, so we'll lock off and secure our perimeter rope. Once we've locked off and secured your perimeter rope, we're going to move across to the opposite corner at the back, and we're going to follow the same process. Now that you can see we have got the tent raised, all 4 corners have been lifted off the ground. At this stage, we can then remove the ground sheet. Alrighty, so our next step here will be to tighten our 13mm perimeter rope that runs the tent. We call this our circumference rope. When you purchase a tent from Dimension Tents, you will generally get the rope already pre-installed through the perimeter loops of the tent. The function of the circumference rope is to clip your perimeter poles onto, and then once tensioned, it helps distribute tension the full length of the tent. So basically what we're going to do here, you can see your circumference rope feeds through your corner ring of the tent. Then we're going to take it down and we're going to lash it and secure it onto the corner peg. So basically here we'll just go around the peg and we'll secure it on. Likewise again with the opposite side, circumference rope is already pre-installed through the perimeter loops of the tent. It's fed through your corner ring and we will go down and secure it on your corner peg. Following this, we will move to the opposite corner on this side and we will then put tension onto the perimeter circumference rope of the tent. So what we're going to do here is we're going to load tension onto the circumference rope and we're going to tension it now to this peg, which will basically then tighten up the circumference along the full 10-meter side of the tent here. What we do here is a basic trucker's hitch. So we loop the rope over, pull it through itself to create a loop in the rope. We'll clip on a carabiner to avoid any abrasion on the rope. We then take the circumference rope and we'll feed it back through the carabiners that we have secured onto the peg. The rope will then go back up to the carabiner on the circumference, clip it through, and then you've got a very simple tensioning hitch. So you can then load a bit of tension. When you're happy with the amount of tension that's loaded on, you can finish the rope off. Following tensioning all your circumference ropes around the perimeter of the tent, we will then next clip on our 3-meter perimeter poles. So each one of the 4 sides of this tent will get a 3-meter perimeter pole in the center. It's quite a simple process for attaching it on. You basically need your guide rope, your 4 carabiners for clipping your perimeter pole onto your tent. So here you can see we have our 3-meter pole with our 2-way steel cap on. We generally like to double up our carabiners for structural integrity. So there we've got our 2 carabiners clipped on. We then will take our 2 carabiners and we'll clip it onto the perimeter rope of the tent. So there we go. You've got your perimeter pole clipped on. Then to the front of your two-way steel cap, we'll add another 2 carabiners on. Next, we will attach our 8mm perimeter rope or guide rope onto our 3-meter perimeter pole to the front carabiners. Already at this point, while the pole is lower down to the ground, I like to double up the rope so that you're not trying to climb a pole to double it up once a pole is fully vertical. So there you can see I've doubled the rope up, and that's going to go directly down to your perimeter peg that's been in the ground. It should be relatively easy, and we can lift up and raise your 3-meter perimeter pole. We then take the guide rope and we'll attach it and clip it into the carabiners that we have already previously installed onto our perimeter pegs. That will basically be your guide rope that we'll use to put final tension onto the tent. We will now repeat this process on the remaining 3 sides of the tent. Next, we are going to install our 4-meter center pole. You've got your 4-meter pole and you've got your rubber cap. So what we want to try and do is find the dead center of the tent, because it's a 10-meter by 10-meter tent, so it's equal on all sides. So basically, you've got your perimeter pole on the right-hand side of me, and I've got the perimeter pole to the back of me. So the center basically from that perimeter pole ends here. The center from that perimeter pole kind of works out to here. So this is going to be the center of our tent here, where we will install our center pole. Here's our center point for the tent, guys. So the next process we're going to be doing is tensioning and loading tension onto the 4 perimeter poles of the tent. What we will do here is we will pull by hand as much tension as we can until we get to a point we can't pull more. At this point, we will again put the simple trucker's hitch into the rope, clip on a carabiner to avoid abrasion, and then we will load tension onto the tent. Yeah, there we're going to lock it off. So yeah, what we can do is you can take your perimeter rope, wrap it once around the peg to stop it from sliding and moving, and then you can finish and lock and roll up the rope nicely to finish it off. We're now going to follow the same process around the full tent. Keeping in mind, we have just tensioned the front side, and now we're going to move to the opposite back side of the tent, so we can kind of balance the tension we are loading onto the material. Make a pulling system there. So when we are tensioning our perimeter ropes, we always load as much tension as you possibly can onto the rope. Generally, when you pull on the rope, there should be very minimal movement in the rope after loading tension on. If you load too little tension, you will find that you don't get much of a point on your center pole, and at the same time you sometimes get wrinkles that will form along the perimeter of your tent. But in general, your rope must be nice and firm, and you will need 2 to 3 riggers to load the correct amount of tension onto your guide rope. Once the 4 perimeter poles have been tensioned, you will see that the center pole might lean a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. What we have here is our Dimension Tense Pole Lifter. This obviously allows us to be able to grip onto the pole, and then it allows us a bit of leverage for lifting up and shifting the pole into position. Our center pole is standing nice and straight, but if you look there, our perimeter pole and our corner pole is not at the desired angle. So what we're going to do here is we've got our dimension tense pole lifter. We hook it onto the pole. One person can obviously guide the pole with the pole lifter, and then with the assistance of my riggers, we're going to shuffle it into position. And there we go. And there we go. So the final step when setting up the tent is to obviously place our protective padding over the rebar stakes. Here we have developed a very simple peg cover that has basically a little Velcro on the bottom and very easily slips over the rebar peg, and you Velcro it onto itself. This just offers a level of protection for anyone walking past that may kick the peg. We will follow this process around the full perimeter of the tent, covering all of the remaining pegs. So there we go, everybody. This is our 10 by 10. It's been set up now with all four sides open, with our 2.5 meter poles with pole caps pushed up into the corner. That kind of creates a bit of a downward angle as well as shape on the tent. Our 3 meter poles on the perimeter and the 4 meter pole in the center. With the next style that we're going to look at is we're going to set the tent up with 3 sides open and one of the back far sides of the tent pull down low to the ground. So here's just a quick example of our dimension tense peg puller. So basically the peg puller has a nice heavy duty hook on the bottom and it works on lever action. So basically the hook attaches around the base of the peg and then it gets pulled out with lever action. So there you can see quite easily with one person the peg gets levered out the ground. We are going to be setting up the tent now with the back side over there pulled low to the ground, the front 2 corners right and left we're going to have raised with this center lifted and that center lifted. Our pegging configuration for the 3 sides of the tent will remain exactly as is from the previous setup. The only thing that's going to change when doing this configuration is when we close the back of the tent, we need to bring our peg line much closer to the corner ring. In order to drop this corner right to the ground is we're going to position our peg about 30 centimeters to 40 centimeters off the corner. The tent peg will still be at the same 45 degree off the angle of the corner, and then we'll repeat this process to the same opposite back corner. Okay, so what we're going to do here next is we're going to put our carabiners onto our corner peg, same as we did with the previous tent. That obviously just allows an attachment point to pull a rope to the corner without having any abrasion onto your corner peg. So here we've got we call it a short rope. It's about 2 meters long. Why we use about a 2 meter rope is so that we can double it up between the ring and the peg for structural integrity. So with the loop on the one side of my rope, we feed it through. Clip it into the carabiners, and then you double it up 2 or 3 times between your corner peg and the ring of the tent. You can then, once you've doubled it up, load a little bit of tension and then finish off the rope neatly. Once you have done this corner, we'll repeat the same process to the opposite corner. On the back side of the tent that we're going to be pulling closed, we will now lock the circumference on the far opposite side, and then we're going to tension it to the peg here. Because there's not a great amount of distance to do your tensioning hitch, we'll just tension and pull the rope and make it as tight as possible. In order to lower the back side of the tent here, we're going to place a peg every 3 meters along the edge of the tent. So basically from the corner ring, we're coming 3 meters, and we're going to place our peg in between the two loops so that we can clip our attachment point onto the circumference rope and tension the circumference rope towards the peg. Generally, when we're pulling the back down of the tent, we will put our peg about 30 to 40 centimeters out from the tent. So that's our first position there. So yeah, we are 3 meters from the corner to this point where we're going to put our peg in, and then we're putting our peg between the two lugs on the tent, and we're going 30 to 40 centimeters out, and that will give us our final position for our pegs. We'll then take a carabiner with a short rope. We'll clip it onto the circumference rope of the tent, and then we'll secure it to the peg that we've just put into the ground. The tighter you pull your circumference rope towards your peg will obviously mean the lower the back end of your tent will be pulled to the ground. Same as we did with the previous setup, we're going to take our 2.5 meter pole with a rubber pole cap, and we're going to push it 60 to 70 centimeters to the inside of the fabric. So basically one rigger can stand on the corner and man the tension on your perimeter, on your guide rope, and then you basically insert your corner pole. Now that we've got our two front corners raised up, we're now going to go about retensioning the circumference ropes on the 1, 2, 3 sides of the tent that have not been tensioned. We've got our 3 meter perimeter pole with our two-way steel cap on. We're going to find the center of the tent, which is right over here. Clip on your carabiners onto the circumference rope of the tent, and from there we will go and we'll join on our guide rope. Your guide rope then comes from your perimeter pole. We'll clip it into the carabiners on your front pegs, and once you have done that step, we can go about lifting our 3 meter perimeter pole. We're going to then repeat the process on the left hand and right hand side of the tent. So as you can see, our 3 meter perimeter poles have been left untensioned. So the next step in the process is to push the 2.5 meter poles into the lowered side of the tent. So we're going to start here in the center. So this is the center panel. As a rule of thumb, generally what we do is we'd use the 2.5 meter pole as a measuring guide. So I take the pole, I place it towards the edge of the tent, and I get a more or less position of where my pole cap should be. So that should be over here. I then turn the pole around, find that same position, and we'll push it and insert it into the tent. The back perimeter poles we like to have standing at a very slight angle, but almost 90 degrees. So what we're going to do once again, we'll take the pole, use it as our measuring guide. We'll measure from the perimeter rope of the tent, get our position for our pole cap, which is here. Turn your pole around, and there we've got our position to insert it into the tent. As you can see, we have now inserted our poles in the back side of the tent that's been lowered down. We've got about a 30 centimeter gap along the back perimeter of the tent. So now the next step would be to find our center point where we're going to put our center pole in. From that perimeter pole to that perimeter pole, my center is kind of here where I'm standing. So over here, we're going to put in our 3.5 meter center pole. Okay, once your center pole has been inserted, We're going to go around the full perimeter of the tent, and we're going to tighten our 3-meter perimeter poles. We're going to start with our very front pole. We're going to tension that forward, and then we're going to look at tensioning our left and right side of the tent. So as you can see, we have now completed the setup of a 10x10 with the backside pulled down. What we will do now is just quickly go around with our pole lifter, and any poles that aren't in a nice perfect straight alignment, we can just go do small adjustments to them and get the bases sitting correctly. Obviously once that's done, we'll go and neaten up the rope work, place peg covers, and there you go, your 10x10 with one side closed. Thank you for watching our Dimension Tents 10x10 training tutorial video. We're going to give you a quick run through on the processes involved in breaking down a stretch tent, and some of the general maintenance and points to keep in mind when de-rigging or taking down a stretch tent. So our first steps when obviously breaking down the tent is we pull our ground sheet underneath the tent to cover as much surface area as possible. Secondly, we'll move on to all our 3-meter perimeter poles, and we'll loosen tension on these. We are now going to go into the tent and remove our center pole out of the tent. As the guys are removing the center poles, we try and pull the ground sheet back just to try and keep the tent as absolutely clean as possible on breakdown. Remove all your internal poles of the tent, and then once you have done that, we can almost drop the tent completely onto the ground so it lies flat on your ground sheet covering. We can now start by removing our front 2.5-meter poles from the corner of the tent. This will basically lower the tent and allow it to come down to the ground. We will drop and lower the last remaining 3-meter poles in the tent. Once your tent is lying flat on the ground, there's no longer any tension onto any of your corner points, and you can remove all corner ropes, pegs and carabiners. We, as a standard, generally keep our perimeter or circumference rope still running through the edge of the tent when we fold it up. Now we're going to have a quick look at folding up and correctly packaging the tent into the bag. So we call this folding a tent panel by panel. We often find it's the easiest way to fold the tent because we concertina it, and it basically makes it the perfect size to fit inside one of your Dimension Tents bags. So what we do is we'll start on the second seam over here. We'll have an assistant on the opposite side, and then we just basically fold this panel over the first panel. Then we come back 2 seams again, and we'll do the same and repeat, folding over, followed by the last panel. Now that you've got your tent obviously lying nice and straight, we will take the far 2 opposite corners and we fold it right over to the opposite edge of the tent. Okay, you can bring that over, guys. Beautiful. And there we go, 10x10 in the bag.